Hey everyone, thank you for attending today's webinar. The webinar will begin shortly. Hey everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Enforcing Continuous Compliance and Security Best Practices on AWS. When you join in today's webinar, you selected join either by phone call or computer audio. If for any reason you'd like to change your selection, you can do so by accessing your audio pane in your control panel. Also from this control panel, you'll have the opportunity to submit questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. If for any reason we could not get your question, we'll make sure we respond to you each personally through email. And the deck itself will be made available through SlideShare, 2 to 3 days after the conclusion of this webinar. So keep an eye out for that, as well as a case study, which is going to be in the handout section, as well as a link that will be sent to you via email. So please keep an eye out for that as well. My name is Samir Vasantapuram. I am a partner solutions architect at AWS, and I'll be one of the panelists today and will be moderating today's webinar along with Sudha Srinivasan, Vice President Marketing at Dome9. And we're also joined by Felix Deschamps, Principal DevOps Engineer at Centrify. So thank you, Sudha and Felix, for taking the time to be on the webinar today. With that said, we can get started.
Perfect. Thanks for hosting us, Samir. And welcome everyone to this webinar. The topic for today's webinar is how companies can enforce security best practices and compliance standards in their cloud environments as they build and deploy applications in AWS. Okay, my name is Sudha Srinivasan. In addition to my role as VP of Marketing at Dome9, I also manage the relationship with AWS, working together to make sure that AWS customers are able to establish and maintain robust security in their cloud environments. So the format for today's webinar, we're going to kick it off. I have a few questions to get the discussion started. So I'm going to ask Felix and Samir these questions. In the meantime, I look to the audience to come back. It's a discussion format, so please, bring your questions in, and we will take them as they come. Look forward to a great session today. So Samir, let me start with you, because one of the things that was a big roadmap for the public cloud, but today, AWS has done a fantastic job of convincing enterprise customers about the security of the cloud, right? The public cloud is extremely secure, and customer confidence is at an all-time high when it comes to securing public cloud environments. So can you talk about how securing environments on AWS is different from data center security, and what kinds of tools and systems are available from AWS to secure their AWS environments?
Sure. Yeah, so security and compliance on AWS is a shared responsibility between AWS and the customer. So the differentiation of the responsibility is commonly referred as security of the cloud versus security in the cloud. And what that really means is that AWS manages and controls the components from the host operating system and virtualization layer down to the physical security of the facilities in which the services operate. And AWS customers are responsible for securing their applications that run on top of that. Customers also want to understand what their responsibility is when we say security in the cloud. So for instance, customer responsibility will be determined, for instance, by the AWS cloud services that they use. So if a customer deploys an Amazon EC2 instance, they're responsible for management of the guest operating system, including updates and patches. and any application, software, or utilities installed by the customer on top of these instances. We also expect the customers to have the configuration of the AWS provider firewall called a security group on each instance. In addition, we have several different partners who offer hundreds of tools and features to help customers meet the security objectives, right, ranging from network security, config management, access control, and data encryption. So this is where our partners like Dome9 bring that extra value to customers who are looking to solve complex business requirements, strengthen the security posture further on AWS, and also to adhere to their compliance standards. But in addition to the safeguards, right, to the question that you asked, we also provide a bunch of tools with regards to security off the cloud and security in the cloud. So all of these tools help customers become more secure in the cloud. So for instance, you can start off by creating your own virtual private cloud, which can allow you to segment public-facing resources from private-facing resources. And traffic flow can be controlled, like I said, through the security groups and something called access control lists. You can then also use identity and access management through which you can implement a system of least privilege that ensures that authenticated identities are only permitted to perform the most minimal set of functions necessary to fulfill whatever task that they're trying to do. But this also balances out usability and efficiency of that particular workload. So operating on this principle limits the blast radius or potential impact of inappropriate use of valid credentials. The principle of least privilege also allows you to enforce separation of duties for oversight in governments. So you might have, app developers who don't have to have access to the instantiation infrastructure, and you don't want the infrastructure guys, having access to the workloads themselves directly. So similarly, we also at the same time take customers' privacy very seriously. So we have tools and services to secure data at rest and transit. So data at rest represents any data that persists for any duration. So this includes things like block storage, object storage like S3, databases, archives in Glacier, and really any other storage medium on which data is persisted. So as an example, if you have data in S3, you can leverage AWS Key Management Services, which is a managed service that makes it easy for you to create and control encryption keys, and is used to encrypt your data. Similarly, you can use it for EBS volumes to encrypt the block storage volume and make that secure as well. And when it comes to data and transmit, there are multiple things you want to consider, right? This can be communication between resources within your environment, as well as communication between other services by your own services and your end user services. So by providing the appropriate level of protection for your data in transit, you can protect the confidentiality and integrity of your application's data as well as your customer's application's data. So when protecting your data in transit, you want to make sure you use things like TLS, which is a common best practice. So what we do is we provide HTTPS endpoints for all communications with AWS APIs. You also have full control over your compute resources to implement encryption in transit across your services. So what we can do there is to use AWS Certificate Manager, for instance, to give you the ability to manage and deploy public and private certificates for your workloads, thereby enabling security or data security in transit. And finally, when planning for encryption in transit, you might also want to consider the use of VPN connectivity into AWS and look into HTTPS for application-to-application communication in a secure manner. And finally, we also have services such as GuardDuty, which is a threat detection service that continuously monitors for malicious or unauthorized behavior to help you protect your AWS accounts and workloads. It monitors for activities such as unusual API calls or potentially unauthorized deployments that indicate a possible account compromise. And it does this through 3 different feeds generally, which is the VPC flow logs, DNS logs, and CloudTrail logs. So it can detect potentially compromised instances or reconnaissance by attackers. And Amazon Inspector, which is another security service that we have, provides automated security assessment service that helps improve the security and compliance of applications deployed on AWS. So those are the kind of how you would look at security on AWS and the several different tools that we have available covering the different aspects of security in the cloud.
Excellent. Thanks, Samir. I mean, you can clearly tell there is a lot of investment that has gone into providing native tools and controls to essentially manage security and compliance in AWS environments. And what partners like Dome9 really provide is that force multiplier, giving customers the ability to go and use these native tools rather than doing some kind of overlay security, using the native tools and giving customers kind of the automation and orchestration capabilities that they need to use these tools at scale. Right. I just want to take a minute to talk about what Dome9 provides before we go on to kind of how Centrify is using us. So Dome9 is a SaaS platform. We have a SaaS platform called Dome9 Arc that is for security and compliance automation. So Dome9 gives customers of AWS the ability to manage security and compliance in their cloud environments at scale, right? So as customers grow their footprint, Dome9 gives you visibility into your entire cloud footprint across regions, across accounts, gives you the ability to go and establish security baseline, security best practices, and to continuously enforce that as you go. So broadly speaking, there are 4 areas that we cover as a solution. Compliance and governance is a very important one. The ability to go and manage to compliance standards such as PCI DSS, HIPAA, SOC 2, Type 2, and so on, as well as your own IT governance needs. The second piece is network security, visibility into kind of your network security posture, security groups, VPCs, the microsegmentation architecture that you have for your applications, and so on, and the ability to go and manage the configurations, the settings that you have, so that you're minimizing exposures, accidental exposure of assets, S3 buckets, and so on. The third bucket is privileged identity protection. How do you protect an AWS environment so that even if a root account or an admin account is compromised, no one still has keys to the kingdom, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. And the fourth piece is cloud security intelligence. This is something that we introduced recently. This really takes real-time data from your cloud environment, CloudTrail, VPC flow logs, as well as all the other AWS services that are providing real-time data, and using that to provide forensics, using that to provide compliance validation, and so on. So, across the board, we have a very mature and broad-based platform for managing security and compliance in your cloud environment. Now, where customers use this, one of it, we're going to talk about it a bit more, but visibility across all your accounts. If you have hundreds or thousands of entities in the cloud across multiple regions, really managing, just understanding what you have and what the effective security posture is across this deployment can be challenging. The second part is, when it comes to configuration management, there are 2 parts to it. One is being able to understand what all the different configurations amount to when it comes to security. What is the effective security posture? And the second part is actively setting or resetting configurations, right? And locking down your configuration so that your environment doesn't get tampered with, right? Unauthorized changes to the cloud. The third part is the vulnerability assessment, remediation, and we actually give you guardrails, right? We allow you to define what are the security best practices and baselines that you need, and then making sure that changes from that baseline, any deviations, are detected and reverted. Okay, and we'll talk about the case studies. A lot of customers use Dome9 to build out their security and compliance playbook as they get ready to scale in the public cloud. Okay, so this is at a glance what Dome9 offers. We will look at some of the parts of the product later in this discussion. So Felix, I want to jump over to you. I think this is a good time to bring in Centrify. So can you talk a little bit about what Centrify does and what your team does? Give us some background about kind of your journey to the public cloud, timeline, what kinds of workloads do you have in the cloud today, and so on.
Sure. So Centrify we are an identity provider. So we as the slide indicates, we have a large number of customers throughout the world, and it's really throughout the world, and we'll talk about that a little more later. But we cover, we have a core set of features, in identity as a service, for example, which allows us to, take both your AD, but also all other types of vaults and other types of identity providers to translate it so that you could be able to authenticate to your cloud using SAML, using OAuth, and the various different mechanisms of authentication. We also do a lot with EMN, basically being able to manage your phone and your identity, and being able to not just manage the identity, but the applications that are associated with that. So we do a lot of group management, being able to define not just are you who you say you are, but are you in the groups that you say you are? Are you able to do the things that you're supposed to be doing? And so as a whole, at a high level, that is what Centrify itself brings to the table. My team specifically is responsible for managing the public cloud. So we've been in the cloud prior to our journey into AWS. You mentioned the timeline. I believe it was sometime during 2017, maybe a little bit before that we started looking at, how do we get into the AWS marketplace, being able to expose some of our functionalities, integration with AWS, and a lot of the same features. For example, being able to take advantage of the IAM, provider features that AWS provides, and being able to be that provider and being able to integrate with that. So as part of being part of the marketplace, we needed to be in the cloud itself. As we continued the journey, it became obvious that, AWS is a great platform to be in on, and has the source of things that we need. So it's been a very good progression for us. So it took, I believe, from the beginning of 2017 all the way to November. I think November is when we finally got onto the marketplace. So it's going through all of those.
Got it. Very quickly, can you touch on, you talked about being on another public cloud before this and then switching to AWS. What was the motivation for that? What brought you to AWS?
So I think the initial sort of things was the business driving the notion of, we need to be in the marketplace. We want to be part of this. As we work through that transition, we keep finding out, the deployment, they have very good deployment technologies there. It's very easy to migrate some of the stuff that we wanted to do. The flexibility in being able to scale up, being able to scale down, but not only in terms of just the deployment, but the fact that AWS provides so much of the platform as in terms of APIs, being able to program all of this stuff allows us to really be able to automate and very quickly build that DevOps playbook and everything else that we needed to do that. So I think it was a combination of things. It was first business driven, but as we look at the platform more and more, it became obvious we really need to put move to this platform. This is very good. And we found that the reliability of the cloud was just phenomenal, right? And so,
perfect. Yeah.
So, that was a great.
That makes a huge difference, especially if you're building your key applications, core applications. Give us a sense for what your footprint looks like in the cloud today. I mean, applications, what types of environments do you have?
So a lot of, we have very large number of servers. I mean, it's probably in the thousands of servers, probably. We are worldwide, so pretty much every data center that, probably just about every region that AWS is in, we probably have a deployment there. Because we have, as I mentioned earlier, we have customers all over the world. We have customers in Europe and in Asia, Australia, everywhere. So we've not only deployed footprints to be close to our customers, to their CDNs and VPCs and everything else related to that, but also for disaster recovery and availability purposes. We'll deploy to a region, and then we'll have a contiguous region for failovers and things of that nature, which is just part of just architecting the whole cloud. So that's been another great advantage of going through the AWS, because they have such good guidances on how to build some of these environments, and going through the whole, well-architected cloud model. That was a very, very good process for us to get through. It was very.
You bring up a good point. So Felix mentioned the well-architected model, the well-architected framework. Samir, can you provide an overview of what this well-architected framework is? Because I think it's very important for anyone who's building applications in the cloud to go take a look at this well-architected framework. This is something that Dome9, as an advanced technology partner with security competency on AWS, had to go through. So can you just talk about what this well-architected framework is?
Yeah, for sure. So as customers started moving or we're starting to really scale their workloads on the cloud, so one of the most common questions we got was, what are some of the best practices that they can adopt, spanning areas of security, reliability, performance efficiency, operations, and cost optimization. So what we do is to look at the several different workloads and their architectures that we've implemented, and distilled a set of best practices down that we now call the well-architected framework, and which consists of the 5 pillars that I mentioned earlier. And not only does this act as a guide to what consideration you should take when architecting for the cloud, but customers use it as a continuous evaluation framework as their workloads evolve to become more complex.
Can you dig into the security pillar a bit more? I mean, because this covers a broad range of things, everything including reliability. Operations is interesting as well. Let's start with security, since that's the topic of today's webinar.
Sure. Yeah, so digging into the security pillar a little more, we start off with a specific set of design principles, right? Like implementing the principle of least privilege, enforcing separation of duties with appropriate authorization for each interaction with AWS resources, and centralizing privilege management to reduce or even eliminate long-term reliance on long-term living credentials. Another principle is to apply security at all layers. And rather than just focusing on the protection of a single outer layer by using like a security group or a firewall to control ingress and egress traffic, applying a defense in depth approach with other security controls, right? They're making sure your credentials are secure, using WAF, using DDoS protection mechanisms like AWS Shield. All of these, focus on more of the defense in depth approach. And as mentioned earlier, protecting data in transit and rest is very important. And you want to classify your data into sensitivity levels and use mechanisms such as encryption, tokenization, access control wherever appropriate. And finally, another important aspect to maintain a strong security posture in the cloud is to enable traceability. You want to monitor, alert, audit, make sure that you take actions and changes to your environment in real time. And you want to integrate logs and metrics with systems to automatically respond and take action. So automating security best practices using Lambda and things like that become a pretty important approach to take when you're in the cloud. You also want to create secure architectures, including the implementation of controls that are defined and managed as code and in version control templates. And finally, you want to prepare for security events. You want to prepare for an incident before you have an incident. So you want to have an incident management process that aligns to your organization requirements. Make sure you have run books, run simulations, and use tools with automation to increase your speed for detection, investigation, and recovery. And this might sound controversial, but keep people away from data. Create mechanisms and tools to reduce or eliminate the need for direct access or manual processing of data. So this reduces the risk of loss or modification and really human error when handling sensitive data. So given some of these different pillars that we were talking about, I wanted to pose a question to Felix, given that you went through this well-architected framework. you when you have several accounts, each with a different workload or a microservice, and perhaps needs to talk to another workload or another account, uh, a strong understanding of your network topology and design forms the foundation of how you provide isolation and boundaries for resources within your environment. How do your analysts and security and compliance folks look and analyze this environment?
Yeah, so when we were going through the whole trying to get through the security review, we looked at several tools, Dome9 one of them, and we really liked a lot of the feature sets that they had. And yeah, when you're talking about different accounts, we have lots of different accounts, because we separate depending on our workload some of the things between different accounts. We also have lots of different environments. We have production environments, we have QA environments, we have dev environments. So we have a big proliferation of just environments, never mind the thousands of resources, the VPCs, security groups, IAM accounts, autoscale groups, you name it. There's a massive amount of these things, and keeping track of them, it's mind-boggling, right? So one thing that we have our folks using is, the first thing is the cloud inventory, which allows us to very quickly get through, like, okay, let me pivot, let me look at everything that I have by types, like, and we use pretty much almost everything on this list, because we use RDS, we use Elastic clusters, we use Redis, we use Lambda functions, we have all these various different things that are there, and so our the folks that are responsible for some of the security inspection, and pretty much everybody in our team as well, is able to go in here and say, okay, let me see what's going on in this particular region. Let me see just what's going on with RDS. Let me see what's going on in this specific VPC. I saw something sort of weird. Let me go drill into this one thing. So you could very quickly drill into the various different resources, pivot by them, click on them, see expanded views of each of those things, and see more options for what's going on there. So that's been very valuable for us, the cloud inventory and things associated with it. There's another one that's very valuable for me, in particular, Clarity, I think it. Yeah, which I think is on the network side of things, but it very quickly lets you see, for this particular VPC, what are my demarcations in terms of the networking? What's in my public net, what's in my internal net, which is something that we do, and it's, again, it's part of the well-architected review. You want to separate things into like subnets, and which ones are public, which ones are internal, which ones are able to talk between this layer, is able to talk to that layer, and being able to lock that down at both, the security, the security group level and the NACL level. And so this tool allows you to see all of that, see what's open, see what's exposed to what, and being able to very quickly model it and see what's going on. So these tools have been very, very useful for us, and engineers kind of look through these to inspect these.
That's a great point. This tool is very useful for security architecture reviews. For example, if you looked at this topology map, this is kind of a segmentation view of in a VPC. We auto classify it based on level of exposure to the outside world, right? That being the left side. And at a glance, you can tell that, hey, I expect the load balancer to be in the DMZ, but what is this default security group sitting here, right? And we can very quickly see why the default security group is sitting in the DMZ, and also which specific instances or entities are affected by that because they still belong in the default security group, right? So that's kind of a very quick visual diagnostic tool that you get with Clarity. It's a good point. Cool. Samir?
Yeah, so I appreciate the answer there, Felix. As a part of the framework, we also recommend implementing strong detective controls so you can identify malicious activity sooner rather than later. And there are different types of detective controls, right? Each of which can be used to support a specific legal or compliance requirement. This can take up a lot of time, as well as require a lot of expertise to write as well as monitor these systems. Can you talk to how you overcame this, whether it's through your own systems or leveraging Dome9's GSL language?
Yeah. So yeah, as you mentioned, especially once if you have 10 machines, okay, it's hard, but it's probably manageable. Once you start talking about thousands of machines and thousands of security groups, it becomes pretty crazy very quickly. Like, did somebody add a root account over here? Are all these machines using the right, password policy? Are they all, doing various things? Are you exposing SSH? Is it to the world? Is it to the right security group? There's all these various things, and there's, obviously, best practices to run all these stuff. So, yeah, so for us, we are also again using Dome9 for that specifically. The GSL language statements and language that they have is pretty powerful. At this point, when we first did the migration, they had a set of rules already pre-canned. They had the CIS foundations and the network alerts. So, some of them I already kind of mentioned. There's a very long list of things that they go check for, making sure you have your KMS keys, that they're not exposed, they're exposed to the right things. And so we're using these specifically, and we found that for the first pass, they're definitely giving us a lot of what we needed just right out of the box, which is awesome because we have a lot of things to go through in trying to build our environments. With also the addition of allowing us to go as we continue, as we hire more people that are working in that space, to be able to fine tune, add, extend some of that functionality. So that's how we've been meeting some of that challenge.
Perfect.
Having that.
So I just want to add, you mentioned GSL for people who are not yet familiar with kind of what Dome9 offers. GSL stands for Governance Specification Language. So Dome9 allows you to go and create these policies, bundles, right? So this one is one of the pre-built bundles for the CIS Foundations benchmark. We have our own kind of Dome9 best practices, which is over 1,000 checks now. And we allow customers to go and create their own bundles. And the way you create a bundle is you create policies using a very simple human-readable language, right? So if you were to look at this policy, Route 53 domain should not have expiration time before 7 days, right? So this is essentially a way for you to check if a Route 53 domain name renewal is coming up that you need to be worried about, right? So we allow you to create these rules using human readable language rather than going and writing code. And a lot of our customers either go and create their rules from scratch or take one of our existing bundles and modify it to their needs, which is likely what I think Centrify would end up doing. It's a good starting point, right? You can start with the Dome9 best practices bundle and then modify it based on what you need internally, right? And when you run this check against one or more environments, you essentially get a report like this, right? Which tells you how many checks you're passing and failing. And at a glance, tell you why exactly, what are you failing and what's happening, right? And you can get this as a printed report that you can then go and use for remediation, right? So this, and again, you being an organization that is API first, DevOps centric, you may or may not use this UI, but behind the scenes, everything we are showing here is accessible via API as well. So, Samir, over to you. Sorry.
Oh, no worries. Thanks for covering that, Sudha. It seems like you guys touch a lot about compliance, and we talked about how you can monitor and figure out your isolation boundaries. One of the common ways that AWS resources have been spun up and misused is through credential thefts, right? Somebody puts out a credential on GitHub, for instance, and boom, you have a bunch of Bitcoin rigs running in your accounts. So one of our fundamental design principles when we talk about the security pillar is implementing and maintaining a strong identity foundation. So Sudha, can you talk about how Dome9 and IAM safety helps customers secure their credentials to access these resources?
Absolutely. So let me talk a little bit about what IAM safety is and what it provides. So IAM safety is one of the capabilities in the Dome9 platform that allows you to lock down certain privileged actions in your environment against anyone actually performing that action without just-in-time authorization. So think of IAM safety as kind of a pseudo for the cloud. Okay, so assume that, say, your root account is compromised. Someone did kind of man in the browser attack, social engineering, and somehow got access to one of your admin accounts. Okay, the big question here is, do they now have keys to the kingdom? Can they go and make Route 53 changes to go and steal some traffic? Can they go and delete some of your critical S3 buckets? What can happen, right? And this is one of the nightmares that pretty much anyone who's building and deploying an application in the cloud faces. We've heard of one of the horror stories that came out a few years ago was a company called CodeSpaces, where the root account was compromised. One of the engineering accounts was compromised, and pretty much, the people who hacked into the system were able to go and delete everything in the cloud account when the ransom was not paid, right? So if your business is in the cloud, you want to make sure that you're protecting it. And one of the ways that we give you a way to harden this is we have this capability called IAM safety that allows you to say, don't allow anyone to go and make, changes to Route 53, for example. You can define which actions you want to protect. And then even if an admin wants to go and perform that action, they have to get just-in-time authorization, even if they're logged in, just-in-time authorization using an out-of-band device like a mobile app, and they get very time-bound access, 15 minutes where they can go and make changes, after which that privilege is revoked again, right? So this is IAM safety. It is something that we built for ourselves, and now we have made available as part of the platform. As a SaaS application in the public cloud, we use this on a daily basis. When we have to go and make some kind of privileged actions, the specific IAM permissions, we lock it down, okay? That is IAM safety. In addition to that, we also allow you to kind of look at all the IAM users, roles, and define, who can elevate to what levels. So this is at a glance what IAM safety provides.
Got it. Yeah, and it also, you eliminate the need for having long-standing credentials. So that's awesome. So again, Sudha, one of the other things that people would want to do is to check and create CFT or CloudFormation templates to see if there is any gotchas before they even instantiate and deploy them, right? And can the Dome9 platform allow some of the DevOps folks to kind of check these CFTs, and can you make them available as a security vetted deployment architecture?
Absolutely. So this is one of the cool things that we actually talked about at last reInvent as well. So we are seeing increasingly that customers are embracing this whole concept of infrastructure as code, right? You don't have manual changes being made to environments anymore. A lot of it is basically being done through CloudFormation templates or Terraform templates, where you define exactly what your infrastructure should look like, and you essentially run it as code, right? Now that you have this code, one of the things that we are able to do is, we talked about the compliance engine. You can now essentially go and run any of these compliance checks against a CloudFormation template before it is deployed in the cloud environment, right? So what we're talking about is static code analysis of a CFT using the compliance checks, right? So take the CIS Foundation's benchmark, apply it to your CFT, and see if it passes or fails even before you actually deploy it in an environment, right? The alternative is you actually go and deploy it in an environment and then go and try to do it live. But we allow you to take that step even further and actually do static code analysis. And we have a very cool reInvent session that we covered this in detail. And Felix, I'm guessing that you are also, as a DevOps guy yourself, this is something that you are considering or using today?
Yeah, actually, yeah, because we do a lot of our infrastructure as code. It's all checked in, and I think Samir mentioned that earlier. Like, you should do everything as code. So yeah, we're actually, as we continue going forward, we'll probably do more of these types of things.
Yeah, and today we have CSP checking available out of the box. We are working on Terraform checking as well, because that is the other thing that a lot of customers ask for. But again, this gives you a lot of power to kind of, what do they call it? Left shift your compliance and security checks before anything actually hits an environment, right? That reduces your cost, reduces the amount of time that it takes to find and fix issues before you go live.
Gotcha. So Felix, you talked a little bit about how you guys use infrastructure as code. I'm curious though, but maybe I'm talking about a different pillar in terms of the operational excellence. But can you talk about how you also may or leverage automation to solve some of the compliance requirements that you're talking about, and are using things like incident-driven Lambda functions?
We are, right. So absolutely. And that was, again, one of the things that was part of the review, basically making sure that you have in place. So Dome9 is how we actually met that requirement, basically. So not only do we have those views that we saw earlier, but they're all driven by code and they all have events associated with them, right? So what we've done is we have code that basically, these alerts are sent over to an SNN topic on our account, and we have basically Lambda functions tied to that can say, hey, what events were driven by that, or what's going on. And what we effectively implemented was a whole series of checks that, on the extreme case, if we see something that we absolutely, for example, if we see an instance that is doing things that it shouldn't be doing, or it has configuration that just seems kind of off, we implement the flows that says, oh, well, isolate that instance, remove it from all these security groups, add it to this special security group, bring up a Kylix Linux instance, attach it to it so that we can do forensics, isolate it, don't bring it down because we still want it up and running so that it still thinks it's fine, so that we can, do investigate, do all of that. And that's completely, it's a totally automated flow that relies on Dome9 as the beginning of the event that we could then build on top of, trigger off of, and then go expand on.
Got it. The notifications, alerts, SNS notifications that you can consume.
Correct. And that's where we implemented that part.
Perfect. It looks like while we were talking, we've had quite a few questions come in. So let's jump to some of the questions that we have here. Again, folks, if you're not able to get your question, we will follow up after this webinar. So first one, let me see how I can. No, I'm not able to click on the questions.
So I can give you one first question. So does Dome9 perform automation of creating configuration items it watches? Otherwise, how does policy apply to resources purely by tags?
Yes, so I think we covered that to some extent. We provide active configuration management, right? You can go and find misconfigurations and also fix them in place in the Dome9 platform, right? When it comes to security configurations, a lot of that, we have two modes that Dome9 operates in. You have the read-only mode where we are able to look at it, consume all this metadata about configurations, and then tell you what needs fixing. The other mode is a read-write mode where you can actually go and see what needs fixing and then actively go and make changes, which are then pushed to your AWS environments. So depending on your level of comfort, you can choose either of these two options.
Gotcha. I think the next question is addressed to you, Felix, and we again probably touched a little bit about it, but the question is, how does Centrify manage the automation of AWS resources?
Oh, okay. So I did mention a little bit of it. So it's all through code. We actually use Terraform very heavily in the creation of AWS resources. So pretty much everything, all our security groups, so like IAM policies, all of that stuff, it's completely written all in Terraform scripts. So even when we do upgrades, the way that we do upgrades, rather than, oh, let me go change this one thing or whatever, basically we say, okay, bring up a whole new set of resources, create them to Terraform, and then once everything is in place, just kill all the other ones. Right?
Immutable infrastructure, right? That's what they call it.
Yep. That's exactly how we do it.
Cool.
Gotcha. And then we'll take one more question, and Sudha, maybe we go back to some of the questions that you may have again. The next question is, how does Dome9 secure on-prem assets as well, or is it restricted to cloud providers?
Sure. So we actually at this point are purely focused on the public cloud. Okay. We started out with a solution that also provided an agent-based approach to on-prem, but we found that being a cloud-native provider has its advantage in terms of being able to be focused on kind of public cloud services and their challenges that customers face in the public cloud. So today we're focused exclusively on the public cloud.
Got it.
Okay. There's one other question about automated remediation that I want to touch on. Does Dome9 offer automated remediation based on policy? This is something that we announced recently. Yes, we do. So we have an auto remediation framework based on AWS Lambda functions that allow you to basically say, okay, if this specific compliance check fails, then optionally go and invoke this remediation action, right? And we are building out for some of the built-in compliance bundles like the CIS, we are providing the remediation bundle corresponding to that, right? So, you could have multiple remediation options. So you as an admin can decide, if I see this particular problem, what should that remediation step be? And the Dome9 solution will go and invoke that in the context of your account, because we don't want the privileges, the permissions that are required to perform some of these remediations. So what we will do is have you basically execute that remediation step in the context of the customer's accounts. And, it's an automated framework. So we call it CloudBots. Please do check it out, cloudbots.io. Very good.
Awesome.
Let's switch back to slides for just a second. And while we're waiting, a couple of questions here. Okay, there were a couple of questions about can Dome9's compliance engine accommodate exceptions to define policies? Absolutely. So this is where, if you want to use, so in terms of exceptions to policies, we have our own bundle. So you can go and define exceptions to policies. You can also say suppress specific alerts as they pertain to resources in your environment, right? Where you know that something is a policy violation, but you know that it's a known thing, you can suppress that alert. Okay. Okay, let's get back to kind of the session that we were talking about. So Felix, can you talk a little bit about how do you establish your kind of security baseline in the cloud? What is your process for defining the baseline? Do you go with one of the well-established, frameworks that are out there? You mentioned CIS, and what does Dome9 help you with there?
The baseline is effectively defined as we were kind of mentioning all the way down to the code, right? So we define this is what we need the environment to look like. We need these parts of the infrastructure to talk to these other parts of the infrastructure. It's defined in code. It gets code reviewed. It gets checked, by the security folks. And then once everybody's comfortable with it and we've looked through it, obviously we go through the whole dev QA environments as well. We have it. But even in those environments, we go, hey, I'll go upgrade to the code automation to the Terraform process. It gets set. Once it's set, what we want to make sure is that it stays set, right? So what Dome9 helps us is to be able to say, hey, it's changed, or this is where all of those SNS topics that I was talking about are able to tell us when something changes, if something changes, or tell us what's out of compliance, because then we can very quickly say, oh, well, just go reapply the Terraform to make sure that gets back in place.
That's a good point. Yep.
Although I think some of the new feature that you were talking about sounds very interesting, so we might look at that. But this is how we handle it today.
Got it. Okay, so we have something called Tamper Protection that Felix, I need to introduce you to as well. Tamper Protection basically allows you to say, okay, this is my security gold standard. In terms of configurations, this is the standard. Lock it down, right? And so then at that point, Dome9 takes a snapshot of what your configuration looks like. And then when there is some deviation, someone goes and performs something that changes it, opens up port 22 on one of your security groups, we are able to detect it and then revert it back to the last known best state, right? The last known gold standard. So essentially automating this process of fixing any kind of unauthorized changes that have happened in your environment, right? So Tamper Protection is something, especially in the context of DevOps, very useful, because what you can do is you can say, okay, Tamper Protection, except when I'm actually deploying to an environment, I take off Tamper Protection programmatically, deploy the code, and then put Tamper Protection back on, at which point whatever you have deployed becomes the new standard.
Okay.
Right? So you can programmatically kind of open up your environment, least privilege, right? Open it up, just when you need it and then lock it back down.
Nice.
So, cool. Okay, last question I had for you. Okay, so where are you going with your footprint? What is happening in terms of Centrify on AWS? Where do you see your next 1 to 3 years looking like?
More of it, I guess. Yeah, I mean, we're growing. It's a good problem to have.
Yeah.
So we continue to scale up. We continue to have more challenges when it comes to all the regulations and scaling and everything else. Yeah, we're gonna be adding more features. We're gonna be growing our security team. We're hiring more people in that space so that they could, like I mentioned earlier, we need to add more rules. We need to fine tune all those things, but also expand our VPCs. Look at a lot of the new features that AWS has and see how they fit into what we're doing. See how we can better scale out some of our solutions. So yeah, that's kind of what I kind of see happening. It's just using more of the feature set on both sides.
Perfect. And I hope that Dome9 is going to be by your side as you kind of expand this part of your security playbook.
Yeah.
I think we've kind of worked well together in that sense.
Also good.
In helping to expand this. So Samir, I'm going to close with a question to you. Can you provide the audience some interesting pointers, quick summary of assets if they are looking to get started based on the discussion we've had today, the well-architected framework? What all can they look at?
Yeah. So if you go to aws.amazon.com/security, and there's a section called resources, there's a whole bunch of things that you can access there. We have white papers, we have developer documents, you have articles and tutorials, and also a bunch of training there that gets you linked to. I would also recommend reading the well-architected framework, read through the security pillar. Most of our reInvent sessions are online on YouTube, so go ahead and take a look, and you'll find a lot of information there. And if you want to really dig into each service and how it would, how we want to implement security controls for it, go to the documents for the particular service, dig through it, and it'll give you a better understanding of how the service works. So those are the different things I would ask people to start off with.
Perfect. Thank you. I just want to close by saying, Dome9, we offer a free trial to all our customers. Anyone who wants to start out, we have a 2-week free trial. Just go to dome9.com and get started. We are an AWS advanced technology partner with security and networking competency. So we ourselves are a SaaS solution hosted, platformed on AWS. And, we went through the well-architected framework ourselves. Very, very useful kind of exercise to go through that well-architected review and really understand how to build your application the way it should be built. And I think that's something that Centrify has also done now, which helps a lot. Okay. Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining. Samir, you want to close it out?
Yeah, absolutely. So we move into some of the Q&A. I think we have a few more questions left here, Sudha. So one of the question was the Dome9 UI looks very helpful. Can we enable it by account based? I'm assuming they wanted to turn it on across multiple accounts within their corporate environment. And how does it work if you have several AWS accounts?
Absolutely. It's a one-to-many relationship. You can have one or more Dome9 accounts managing one or more AWS accounts. So, typically what we find is you have one Dome9 account that gives you kind of centralized control over your entire AWS footprint. And then you can add different AWS accounts to that, and you can manage the permissions of who gets to see what, essentially, right? So that allows you to have a centralized Dome9 admin who gets to see what that entire footprint looks like and define some of these best practices, compliance checks, governance requirements across multiple accounts. And especially true if you have multiple DevOps teams and you want to have some kind of policies around checks that you want to apply across the board.
Got it. We have one more question. Is there an EPA on security checks with Terraform? That is what we're planning to use.
Yeah, so definitely, if that is something that you're interested in, definitely reach out to us. It is being built right now. And we have a dev process that we have at least 2 deployments every week, pretty much on the platform. We ourselves being a SaaS platform, following DevOps methodology. So this is coming. It is in the works. Let's get started in the conversation. Okay. CFTs, again, we announced it. We made it available before last reInvent. Now we've been working on Terraform, so it'll come very soon.
Awesome. All right. One more question, Sudha. So why do you feel Dome9 is required when AWS has many security tools available as native tools?
It's a great question, and it's something that we started talking about. Again, we have been partnering with AWS since I think time immemorial, right? Since AWS had a partnership model, and AWS has been a very good partner for us. So what we provide are essentially tools that allow you to accelerate and expand how you use the native controls provided by AWS, right? Everything we are building are automation and orchestration built on the core capabilities that AWS itself provides. So Gartner calls this emerging security category cloud security posture management. So if you all are kind of looking at Gartner, CSPM is the short form for it. Essentially, they said that you need a set of security and compliance automation tools that allow you to leverage the native controls. We gave a simple example of the tool like Clarity, that is that visualization tool that allows you to look at how you've set up all your network security groups, your VPCs, and so on, what your segmentation architecture looks like, be notified when there are things that have happened that are not allowed according to your security specs, and so on, right? So essentially what we've done is built on top of security groups and VPCs and IAM roles, but what we give you are capabilities that let you manage this at scale across hundreds or like thousands of instances, dozens of regions around the world.
Perfect. Awesome. Thanks, Sudha. I think that was the final question. So on that note, we'll wrap up today's webinar. Just as a reminder, you will receive an email within the next 2 or 3 days with a link to these slides on SlideShare and a recording of the webinar. I wanted to thank all of you very much for attending. Felix and Sudha, thank you very much for being on today and participating in this discussion. Again, for any of you on the webinar, if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And thank you very much again for all of your time.
Thank you, Samir. Thanks, everyone.